In February, I travelled to the idyllic Risley Hall Hotel in, well, Risley of all places. I'd be spending 2 days in what Risley Hall claims to be an 11th century manor. I'd be playing 7 games of MESBG, and I only regretted I hadn't taken the time to either grow a handlebar moustache or buy a monocle off Etsy. Welcome to Battle Camper and 7th City Collectables Nottingham 2023 SBG Middle-earth Grand Prix. This was a 600-point event marketed as competitive. I'd be taking my beat-up old Rohan because at the time of playing, I still hadn't finished my new Elves army. That meant Theoden, Gamling with Banner, and Dernhelm with a snapped spear and missing Merry, 20 riders and 2 Royal Guard. No throwing spears on anyone except for Dernhelm, ironically given hers is broken. I then had a second banner for good measure. So, genuinely thrilled to be back in the world of MESBG, I head into the venue and got set up for game 1. For my first game, I'd be playing Stephen and his Rivendell. He'd brought Elrond, Círdan, 6 knights, and a whole bunch of warriors maxing out his bow allowance. The game was Fog of War, and for anyone who doesn't know, that means that each player is going to be doing secret sneaky stuff. Actually, 3 secret sneaky stuff specifically speaking. First, each player nominates a piece of terrain in the opponent's deployment zone that they've got to capture. Second, they nominate an enemy non-leader hero to try and kill, and a friendly non-leader hero to try and protect. For me, the hero selection was pretty easy because Stephen only had one non-leader hero, and that was Círdan, so I knew that I'd have to try and kill him, and he knew he'd have to try and protect him. For my side, I tried to protect Gamling because he's not trying to get into the thick of fighting anyway, he's more of a buff. Also, he's got heroic defense, so he's quite easy to keep alive. For terrain, I chose the big pile of rocks at the back. That was before I knew he was going to deploy right next to them. And finally, with all that admin out the way, we were ready to start. And I started strongly by promptly losing priority.
No heroics my side. No heroics from me either.
I deployed in my favourite formation, known in the business as the tactical clump, on the right-hand side of the board, just to make sure it was extremely clear which terrain piece I was heading for. Stephen formed a double line, with his knights riding out ahead of his infantry.
Círdan is going to move, and then at the end of his move is going to use his free point of will to try to cast Aura of Dismay.
Okay. What's Aura of Dismay do?
Which is the why everything within 6 inches of him causes terror.
Okay, nice, yeah.
No.
After that inauspicious start to Stephen's casting for the weekend, I decided to commit, sort of, to the charge. The right side of my army belted up the board, trying to get around his flank, whilst the centre moved slowly enough that I could still shoot arrows. But before I could do that, it was time for Stephen's shooting, and he promptly took a rider off his horse.
So then I've got 5 to shoot back with.
Yeah.
They're all going on Elrond, they're all hitting on 5s. So, hitting on 5s, first one. Nope, second one. Yes. Up or down? Down.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a dead horse. No, I'm sorry.
That was a real stroke of luck for me. For anyone who doesn't know, Elrond has got a power called Wrath of Bruinen, which is very, very good at dealing with cavalry armies because it can take a whole lot of riders off their horses all at once. The fact that Elrond no longer had a horse made it very difficult to get where he could do the most damage.
So, we're on to priority turn 2.
Yeah.
That's a 5. 5 as well.
Now, Steve's Elrond had 3 foresight points which he can use to change his priority dice roll. But he didn't so early in the game, so I took priority. He did, however, decide to do heroic channeling with Círdan. Given my relative success with shooting in round 1, I decided to double down and move only 5 inches with the entire left flank. The right flank moved full 10 to try and stop him from returning fire. In return, Stephen's knights shuffled up. His line of foot elves remained basically stationary, and Círdan cast Blinding Light. Not only is that going to protect Círdan and everyone within 6 inches of him, which is everyone, from my shooting, but because he channeled it, it means that it's going to last until he runs out of will. Partially thanks to that, and partially thanks to our mutually shoddy rolling, there were no casualties at all in the shooting phase, and we were back to priority.
4.
So Stephen took his second priority. There were no heroics from anyone, and at the end of the move phase, it all looked like this. In this phase, I'd foregone shooting on all but one rider to try and rush the elven lines. The elves had once again just done a bit of jostling, clearly content to wait for me to come to them. Except for one of my riders being dismounted, the entire shooting phase in both directions passed without incident.
Okay, so we're on to priority. Feels like this might be the first of the big priority rolls.
Yeah.
That's a 3.
1.
With the lines finally close enough for charges, Stephen wanted this priority. He'd have to spend all 3 of his foresight points from Elrond in order to get it, and he decided that that was a cost worth incurring. However, I wouldn't let the charges slip through my grip that easily, and so I decided to call moves with both Theoden and Gamling, which would catch almost every rider on the board. Unfortunately for Steve, he didn't really have a good option to counter, and so despite having spent his foresight points, I ended up getting most of the charges anyway. By the end of my move, most of the Elven line was tied up, and only the knight with a banner was left to countercharge me. This was a good start, but with Elven-made weapons and Elven-made skill, they could still be winning a lot of the fights, and success in this turn was by no means guaranteed.
Okay, we're into fights then.
Into fights.
Any heroics from you?
I'm going to do a heroic combat with Elrond.
Okay, betting big.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to combat with Dernhelm.
Okay.
I'm going to defense with Gamling.
Yeah. Okay.
Since he's recharging it anyway.
We had a roll-off to decide whose combat would go first, and I won it.
So that's Dernhelm's attacks.
Yeah.
That's my knight's attack.
Okay.
Strength 4 on the charge.
No 6s yet.
I've got a 1.
Oh, okay. So that's big mine. Unless you want to banner reroll that.
banner reroll that. Yeah. It's a 6.
No! Oh, right. Well, first thing we do is I'm going to banner reroll for Gamling's banner.
5s all around.
No. I'm going to might that up to a 6.
Yeah.
So 4, 5, 6, it's yours. 1, 2, 3, it's mine.
Yeah.
It's mine. Unlucky.
With that stroke of luck, Dernhelm got to strike, and with the Rivendell knight being trapped, she doubled up her strikes and quickly dispatched him. Given Dernhelm's heroic combat had gone first, I couldn't use it to do what I actually wanted it to do, which was to respond to Stephen's heroic combat. So instead, I simply used it to engage more knights, try and get them off the table this turn. In any event, unfortunately for Stephen, his heroic combat didn't go off because despite winning the fight, he simply couldn't kill anything. That set the tone for the remaining combats, whereas I got a couple of kills, he won fights but got nothing back in return.
Okay, so we're back to priority.
Yeah.
No more foresighting for you.
No.
Sorry, I don't mean to rub that in.
6.
But you don't need it.
I called a move with Dernhelm, and given my army was so scrunched up now anyway, that caught most of the riders. The elves didn't have much in the way of their own moves, they just sort of shuffled in, and then we were on to combats.
Elrond is going to heroic defense this time.
I don't think Gamling needs to, so I'm not going to. I am going to combat off this knight here.
Yeah.
So Dernhelm called a combat against the Rivendell knight at the end of the row.
So I've got 6s with Dernhelm.
Right. I've got a 6.
Oh, you arsehole.
Every time.
So it's a roll-off.
It's a roll-off, yeah.
It's yours. Again.
In typical elven fashion, despite the fact that Stephen had won the combat, he couldn't cause any wounds, and we were on to the priority combats.
So I think in that case I'll do Elrond next.
So I got 6s.
I've got 5, so
you
I
out
will
of white?
use. But I can use Lord of the West to re-roll 1.
There we go.
No.
Given Elrond had already called heroic defense, so I'd need 6s to wound him, Stephen elected not to might up and allowed me to take the combat.
So I need 6s. And that's the correct number. None. And with the sword,
1.
fate.
Fate. No, but he can re-roll that.
2, 3, 4.
You can. No. Taking a wound then.
Taking a win.
The elves really needed a break. What they got was 2 more casualties, and they only killed 1 Rohan model in return, but they did get priority, so there you go, that's not nothing.
4. Come on. There we go.
I'm going to have to spend Erwin's last might
Yeah.
to call a move.
Yes.
Stephen didn't counter, so I was charging basically across the board again, although I was now doing terror checks because of Serdan's Aura of Dismay. To be fair though, my Rohani boys did me proud, and most of them made the charges where it counted. Now you'll also note that throughout this game I've been sort of sneaking, in quotation marks, 2 riders around the back of that big pile of rocks there. Whilst that does mean I'm holding my objective at the moment, it does kind of give the game away a little bit, and I expect they'll be the target of his shooting this turn. But hey ho, as Charles de Gaulle once said, who needs mind games when you've got a big horse? He didn't say that, but he did say it's better to have bad method than to have none, which I find kind of validating. What was I talking about? Oh yeah.
You get 3
I think it's time for shooting.
So you get 3 from Azog.
Yes.
You still have any?
No.
Okay. I do have one.
Yeah.
That arrow is just going to take a pop at Serdan.
My only rider capable of firing takes a pot shot at Serdan.
That's a hit.
Hits.
So in the way for that
Yeah.
guy at the back. That's one more of those, please.
Really well played.
Oh, 3 6s in a row! Oh, okay, so that's a wound.
Right. The fate.
No,
No.
taking a wound.
Taking a wound. He's got 1 wound left.
Oh.
Realistically, this brought the game to an end. There was one more round of combat, but with not much to show for it on either side, and that last shot on Serdan might not have been decisive, but it certainly was satisfying. We'd basically done the old switcheroo. Steve had tried to keep Serdan alive and kill Gamling, whereas I'd tried to keep Gamling alive and kill Serdan. Because I'd wounded Serdan and Gamling was unwounded, and I'd held my terrain piece, it meant that the final score was 7-1. It had been a great game. By being able to rush to his side and lock up his infantry, it had stopped him from being able to get to my side of the board, so I basically knew that my terrain piece was safe. I think Steve's best hope was in his cavalry, but even if I didn't win all that many priority rolls, I basically won all of the move-offs, which meant that I could keep them locked there in perpetuity. He also failed a lot of his casting rolls, and I was super lucky to get Elrond off his horse in turn 1. Steve was really good to play against, so thanks very much for the game if you're watching, and it was on to lunch. Happily, this event had a fantastic long break between each game, so Kiwi and I could go and explore the grounds and find somewhere for a discreet poo, and then headed back for a chat and a debrief before game 2. Next, I was excited to play Nathan and his excellent-looking Azog's Hunters. Now, I've not played this army since my first ever introductory game to Middle-earth, when my tutor decided to take Azog and caused me some serious problems. Now, Azog wasn't actually here. As is his custom, he delegated to Bolg. Bolg in turn was assisted by Fimble the Hunter, and both Bolg and Fimble had wargs. The game mode was Retrieval, one of those matches that really rewards speed. A mounted Rohan list was well suited to it. In Retrieval, we try to steal an objective from their side of the board, while trying to protect one on our side of the board. I was, I think, rationally scared of Bolg, and so by the end of deployment, I'd used the hill and the tents to the best of my ability to give myself some cover for the first turn. I did then take priority anyway, and actually just tried to move as close as I could.
So if you don't mind, rather than measuring each one, I'm just going to move up in the same line.
It's about there, it'll be alright.
Theoden coming up
As long as
behind.
they're not start doing 20-inch moves. Right?
Yeah, it's like, that's probably around 10 inches, isn't it?
yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
By the end of my move phase, I pulled the old switcheroo. I dashed away from the bulk of his forces on the right-hand side of the board to leave them with nothing to do, and darted around the hill to try and overwhelm and break through the left-hand side of the force as quickly as possible so I could dash across the board and retrieve the objective. There were a lot of shots coming from the filthy orcs this turn, but they only got 1 horse to show for it. That was then it for the turn. With the lines assembled so close to each other, and me desperately wanting those juicy cavalry charge bonuses, we came to a pivotal priority.
5. Good roll.
6.
Oh, you bastard.
So, I'll just ask you, any heroics?
I think there might be some. I'm going to call with Merry. Call move with Merry.
Mary's not here today, unfortunately. I don't think I'm going to bother.
Okay.
You're going to outnumber me either way.
Fair, yeah.
By the time that heroic move had finished, the jaws of death had thoroughly closed in around that little group of orcs on the left. I'd left behind a few sacrificial riders to hold up Bolg and he charged them. The rest of the right-hand orcs just shuffled up to get shots. Finally, I placed Gamling near the sacrificial combat, hoping that his rerolls would help my followers stay alive a little bit longer and keep Bolg from my objective.
Okay, so we're on to combats then. And it's your priority.
With no messing around, Nathan elected to start with Bolg's combat.
Right, I'm so tense. No 6s. No! I've got my banner.
You know what I'm going to do if you get a 6, don't you?
You're might up, but at least I can make you burn a point of might. No.
Terrifyingly, Bolg would now be killing riders on 3s, and he had 3 attacks to do it.
Only one!
Only one.
In revenge, the riders in the left flank really did the business and took a lot of orcs out, losing only a single rider in return. This did exactly what I needed it to do. By neutralising the bulk of that threat, I get a lot of battlefield control. Nathan's run of poor luck wasn't over there. I proceeded to promptly win the next priority roll.
could do a heroic move.
Yeah.
Nathan declined to call a move, so it was just up to me to put my big old thinking cap on and try to figure out how to stop Bolg from reaching my objective whilst maintaining my momentum towards his objective. I decided that the best way to do this was to send even more riders up behind the pack that had just broken through and just keep the bare minimum behind to hold Bolg up long enough for me to take the game. Note this poor dismounted warrior holding up Azog and another warg, all by his lonesome. Nathan then had another go at the shooting, but his luck really wasn't turning.
So I've got seven guys hitting on 4s.
Okay.
So I'm going to do that lot and these 3.
That's not good roll.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's 1 hit. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Not only just one hit, but just one hit that promptly failed to kill anyone. Without much optimism, the last archer had another pop at it.
Hey, we got a horse. We got a horse.
Miraculously, another went down to the captain. For the first time this game, my little raiding party was starting to look vulnerable. Onto combat, and in the Thimble v Dernhelm combat, we both called a strike. Everything to gain. Nathan rolled first.
Yeah, you can do. Roll up your strike. Not ideal.
I didn't enjoy it for long.
I also got a 1. So we're drawing again.
We had jumped the gun rolling that strike because we didn't start with that combat. We started with the dismount fighting Bolg for sound tactical reasons.
Let's start here. This is funny. So let's go here.
I only had 1 dice, so I needed a big roll.
Oh!
Not ideal. We then moved on to the big combat. A whole big pile of horsey dudes versus the poor trapped Thimble.
Sorry, Emma. We've got Dernhelm, 3 riders, and a Royal Knight. 4s. 6s. So it's 2, and then that again. 3, 4. 4 wounds.
So there went Thimble, and with him, the last of the Orc resistance on the left flank. After this and one more Orc being killed, we were back to priority, and it was one which, mercifully, Nathan took.
I don't think there's any heroics for me to do. The only one I'll be tempted with is Gamling, but you can't charge Gamling himself anyway. So that's no heroics from me.
Bolg and friend rushed off south, getting dangerously close to my objective. The difficulty here, of course, for me is that even though I'm doing quite a lot of killing, it's not going to help me if Nathan can nab the prize. This late into the game, Nathan decided that the line on the right may as well just stay put and get shots in both directions as needed.
These guys are going to rush back this way.
Oh no. I forgot about them.
He's going to pelt it 10 inches around there with the prize.
Finally, Gamling came south, ready to lend his aid as required. Next, despite Nathan reserving so much of his force to stand back and shoot, he just couldn't make any damage stick, and there were no casualties on either side. In combats, I finally managed to finish clearing off the left-hand side of the board. I grabbed his prize and made a beeline back to safety. Down by my objective, Nathan called a combat, so I called defence with Gamling. Bolg did manage to get his combat to go off, but because of that defence, he couldn't clear out that side of the board. Realistically, this had sealed the deal for me. With my rider still causing him problems in the south, and yet having a free hand in the north, I was able to get his objective back across the centre line and stop him from doing the same with mine. However, I do have an apology to make to Nathan, because in hindsight, it does appear I was being a big smelly cheat. I thought that my models could grab my objective, sacrificing a point because it had moved off its starting point, but protecting it from Bolg, but they can't. They can only grab it after an enemy model has touched it first. Given I only grabbed it in the last turn, thus surrendering that point anyway, and that last turn came before the game timed out, I don't think it would make a difference. Also, with my knights now getting behind his archers, the longer the game went on, the closer he got to being tabled. It's still not good, and I'm still genuinely sorry to Nathan.
That's it then. Good game. Really good game. Oh, Jesus. Right, so what happened?
It had genuinely been such a good game. It was closer than it looked, with Bolg being right there hot on my heels. However, after a run of bad luck, particularly that first heroic combat that failed to go off, Bolg and his other cavalry never really recovered the momentum. He also lost some pivotal priorities and move-offs, which meant that my riders were able to get charge bonuses basically throughout the game, thus doing a huge amount of damage, and really not taking that much damage in reply. Nathan had also invested heavily in his archers, and they just didn't really contribute that much. Fluffed rolls, turn after turn, meant that I was able to basically just ignore them entirely whilst they sat there to get the shots, and they only took out a couple of horses, which was fine because I could use the breathing room to grab his objective and get it off my side of the board. Even so, it was super intense and just a huge amount of fun, and I really hope I get to play Nathan again soon. Next it was lunch, and one of my favourite bits, getting to ogle all the entries into the painting competition. Once again, the MESBG community blows others out the water with the lengths that its members will go to show off their armies. Case in point, these lovely Icy Isengard boys by Hayden Cartwright, this fantastic Bjorning hideaway complete with deer familiars by Aidan Lummer, with which I might have a run-in later in the weekend. For me, the mushroom-bedecked bases really kicks this one up a gear. And encapsulating themes from the previous two, there's these Nightmare Fuel Ice Bjornings. These ones are by Teddy Avell, and I love the big resin ice blocks on the 25mm bases. Finally, there's Zen Sprawl's Breaking of the Fellowship, where the banks of the Anduin have been beautifully rendered. Now, this was a 4-game first day, and my next game would be Calamedan's and Divide and Conquer. After that, I'd play Owain Thomas at Contest of Champions. The problem is that both of these players had also brought Riders of Theoden, a double dose of mirror match. The thing is, the prospect for spending this relaxing Sunday having to edit 2 videos in which I'm explaining to you whose Theoden is who and which Gamling just rerolled what is so unappealing, I would rather spend the time teaching my dog to chew off my toenails to avoid having to manually clip them.
There we go.
So I'm sorry if that's a disappointment, but I don't think it would be the most interesting couple of games to watch anyway. My apologies to Callum and Owain, who put up with me for a couple of hours apiece and they don't even get a video out of it. But given I lost both these games, what we're going to do is have a look at why that might be by comparing my list to theirs and seeing what performed well to try and optimise it in the future. For the moment, we're going to pretend that I'm a good and rational player and ignore any questions of player skill in determining the outcome of one of these games. So first, what was different about their lists compared with mine? Let's start with heroes. Callum had brought the same heroes as me, and Owain had brought the same heroes plus Éomer. Both players loaded up with throwing spears, I only had the one on Dernhelm, and both players loaded up with Royal Guard, I only had 2. So in a nutshell, that was it. Owain had one more hero, Éomer, and both of them had more Royal Guard and more throwing spears. How did they make the difference? Let's start in reverse. Throwing spears. I find this one to be an odd one because no one seems to sit on the fence. Throughout the weekend, people seem to split into 2 camps. They were either ardent pro or anti-spear ideologues. So I guess I'm going to have to stick my head above the parapet and do the most dangerous thing you can do in an online wargaming community. Express an opinion. This is as opposed to my usual strategy of simply relaying the opinions of other people as a way of deflecting criticism. So in Callum's game, he certainly got lucky with them, but they definitely did the business. He wasn't making a choice between exploiting his high mobility and his shooting, and he was able to get a couple of key critical dismounts early on. This included Gamling, which prevented him making as effective use of his banner throughout the game. In Owain's game, we were playing Contest of Champions, so it didn't really have as much relevance because we were deploying right next to each other anyway. However, a couple of good throws on the way into key combats was enough to be a thorn in my side. I've gone back and forth over this, but on reflection, in future, I will be taking throwing spears in big point Rohan games. They might not always get the kills to make their points technically back, but they give you a huge amount of flexibility and the extra point of strength over a bow can be massive. Point 2 is the Royal Guard. Now, hear this. If Royal Guard were as accessible, financially speaking, as Riders of Rohan, I'd already have an army full of Royal Guard. I've never been on the other side of this issue. The extra point of fight is absolutely colossal, Bodyguard is extremely helpful, and frankly, I kind of resent paying points for bows built into Riders of Rohan, which I'm never really going to use. But anyone who's watched my Highland Rohan painting video will know why I think the pricing structure is absurd and the models just don't justify the cost. I don't think there's much more to say about it. If you can justify the cost, Royal Guard are amazing. Point 3 is numbers of heroes. Now, I'd actually asked for advice from my GBHL team, the Fellow Bellies, as to whether or not I should also be taking Éomer and dropping a bunch of riders before going into this tournament. Now, after the fact, I've actually been told that I was strongly advised to take Éomer. Apparently advice that I didn't read or read and just promptly ignored. Now, if that sound advice had penetrated my unusually shaped skull, there's no doubt I would have taken it. I love Éomer, great fun, wonderful sculpt, what's not to love? It's a little difficult for me to make a call based on these games as to whether or not it would have been the right thing to do. Yes, I was defeated by the list with Éomer, but that was Contest of Champions. I do have to wonder whether the outcome would have been different if the games had been reversed, because Divide and Conquer does give an advantage to armies with more bodies on the table. That being said, the AMA list did break me and got close to tabling me. Having an extra 3 might and a big tough fight 5 hero counts for a lot of killing power, and even if again they don't technically make their points back, AMA is also very difficult to shift from important locations, such as an objective. So what I've learnt here is I need throwing spears across the board. I want to try and convert more Royal Guard, because screw buying them, and I want to take a hero-heavy army, even at 600 points. Do let me know whether or not this has been of any value. Sometimes I think, what's the point in giving tactical advice, because either people know it already, in which case they're not going to need it, or they won't know it, and what's more terrifying is they might actually take your advice, and if it goes horribly wrong, I don't want to be sued. Anyway, after the last game, the ostentatiously furnished gaming hall emptied, and the hotel's bar became a chaotic pit of sweaty nerds, no offense, furiously relaying the moments of the day, both glorious and inglorious alike. There was then a dinner in which the Titanic's ballroom vibe of the venue was only slightly let down by the Titanic's rat population vibe of the food. And then, just like that, day 1 was over, and it was time for me to be reunited with the dog. I know I've had a quiet period recently on the uploads, but that is well and truly over. Day 2 of this is up next week, and then I've got a whole bunch of cool stuff to gum up your timeline and make you consider clicking that unsubscribe button, but please, Jesus God, don't do that. As a cool kind of I'm back celebration, I've got a really cool gift giveaway next week, which is a new, sealed, mint, pristine, commemorative Tolkien £2 coin. That'll go to one of my Patreon supporters at random. If you want to support, the link is in the description, obviously, or you can use my affiliate link for 7th City Collectables and get yourself something nice in return. But you know I won't judge if you want to be a total wiener about it and keep all your hard-earned money for increasingly unaffordable other luxuries like, you know, clothing, food, shelter. The rest of us will be luxuriating nude in a bath full of unpainted miniatures and unlocked subscriber posts. Anyway, many thanks to my opponents and to the TOs. It was such a cool event. It was pegged as a competitive event, but actually, it was one of the more chill ones I've been to. I hope to see you back for the next video, and thanks very much indeed for watching. Found the world's loudest tap. It's so loud.